So as a public service, I made the following list of things women no longer need to hear men's opinions on. Please take a moment to jot these down.
Dig, dut, doot, parp, perb, and flab, narn.
Does that make sense?
This is.
You are a loser because you're just simply a loser.
Z.
Equally important is encouraging more men to sometimes just shut the hell up.
R.
Sexually frustrated, unemployed losers who are looking for sexually frustrated, unemployed losers.
S.
It makes no sense.
It is February 7th, 2016. I'm your host and moderator, Barry Whippy. Seated next to me is your guerrilla journalist,
Jeremy Rothkushel respects cannabis.
and your centerpiece, Mr. Harry Pancake. Pancake. Lots of noise. Too much fucking noise. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Fuck! I just have to think for a second here. There's too much noise. There's too many fallacies. Logical fallacies. How do we identify these logical fallacies in this poppy modern-day discourse? How do we address it? How do we define what they are? How can we point them out to the people that use them to claim instant illegitimacy for their silly-ass arguments? I don't know. Let's talk about it.
So, continuing this never-ending conversation of ours, and I guess maybe we could look at the idea of the trivium method, where there is a three-part process in how one might have rational thought and discourse. And the three steps of that are known as grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And grammar is not the way it's normally thought of. It's more in the realm of the content or the facts of the matter. The who, what, the why, the where, the when, those types of things if you're thinking about it in a journalistic sense. So the facts of the matter on the table. That's the grammar. That's step one. Step two is the logic. How do these facts fit together? What are the dynamics that they are involved with? What are the pieces that connect them or disconnect them? It's at this point that you begin to think about whether you have a coherent enough picture of what's going on. And if you don't, at stage two in the logic and how the shape of these facts, that they need to be rearranged if the picture's not coherent. Or you might want to go back to stage one in the grammar and look for missing facts that were left off of the table. And then once you have a sense of a logical apprehension of enough of the facts, because in a way you never have all of the facts, so it's an ongoing process to use the trivium method, then you can move on to the third step of rhetoric, which is pretty much as it sounds. It's the way that you would go about communicating your newly found or oldly found knowledge, your logical picture of what's going on. It's your rhetorical strategy to communicate, to educate, to dialogue, that type of thing.
Rhetoric involves, like John Taylor Gatto talked about, the active literacies. The active literacy of being able to write and speak publicly and to communicate an idea, whereas the passive literacies, the ability to read someone else's idea or to listen to someone else tell you what their idea is.
Prior to the First World War, literacy commonly was divided into passive literacy, reading, and active literacy, speaking and writing. And none of us are aware that in colonial days, to teach active literacy to ordinary people was a crime. Why? Because reading, you're locked in your own head, and you still have the benefit of being able to read the boss's instructions about what to do. But if you can speak well, as our current president can, or write well, you can reach way beyond your own skull and recruit allies. That's a no-no for ordinary people. They're supposed to be so inarticulate.
The inward coming literacies and then the outward literacies, the projective literacies. The modes of literacy continue to expand as media and technology transform. In the past, one would not need to understand video as a grammar or something like that, or be able to put together video as an active literacy. But more and more, there are more and more modes of both passive and active literacies that are necessary to be a capable and communicative human.
To express your understanding is the thing that helps people come together and find out,
hey, we have a lot in common. Let's work together on this.
But if people can only passively consume the idea, they're going to function like a school of fish.
In terms of Gatto's analysis, the public school system is actually a whole different class of education than the highly sophisticated private schools on the eastern seaboard that the children of the elite go to.
Elite private boarding schools like Groton, St. Paul's, Choate, Lawrenceville, Gunnery, Hotchkiss.
And that in the public schooling system, the literacies that are taught are limited to that which can make you an effective communicator in an office setting. You can understand enough to get your job done in your cubicle. You can know enough to make sure that your manager doesn't waste too much time, but not enough that you might actually be able to persuade other fellow office workers to do something different, to figure out another management model where you all co-equally share responsibility potentially. So that's just maybe one example of like what he might be talking about.
That's kind of one of the reasons why the trivia method of education is an important consideration. It disregards the motive of your instructor, because if you understand grammar, logic, and rhetoric, you'll root out whatever motive the educator is operating under, and you won't be deceived. You won't be deceivable. You'll see the manipulation at its face. These are just tools that you can use regardless of any authority figure or power structure.
The taking on of the trivia method in many ways is the taking on of the full responsibility for one's own education and a continuing education throughout life. And if you have these tools, then you can parse out who your teacher is in the moment, if there is a human there, whether it's a more general world form, and then you can make the most of it for yourself. And then as you become more empowered in terms of using these tools, and you're seeing that you're missing pieces of grammar, there's a tendency to go seek out teachers who might have the pieces of grammar or logic or rhetoric that you feel that you're missing.
If you don't have the faculty of reason and use it to determine valid relationships between various facts and dynamics, what understanding do you really have?
One other piece of rhetoric in terms of the trivia method is that rhetoric is understood in a different fashion than the idea of a rhetorical question only. Rhetoric is really all of the communicative arts for whatever purpose. Sometimes a rhetorical question that's seeking to ask people to ponder something or to think about something, but also for the rhetorical method to communicate something very specifically, very potently in the moment for a very specific reason.
So, having said all that, it would be useful to begin a conversation about logical fallacies here. Logic is basically the relationship between premises and conclusions. If something is logical, then there's a clear relationship. Logical fallacies are found in rhetorical statements using rhetoric, that have a disconnected relationship between the premises and the conclusions. Each logical fallacy explains a different way in which that disconnect can occur. For example, if I were to call you an idiot, that is not a fallacy. I mean, it's not sorry. It is not a logical fallacy. It is either true or not true. It is just a statement. If I said, you are an idiot, therefore you are wrong, that is where we get into making a logical fallacy.
So there has to be two dots in the matter, at least, for there to be a logical fallacy, a disconnect of logic.
Correct, yeah. There must be a premise and an inference of a conclusion from that premise. A couple common ones that everyone has heard at least once in their life. A red herring is an example of a logical fallacy.
The usage of irrelevant facts to distract an opponent or an audience from substantive discussion.
This fallacy is called a red herring in reference to fox hunting, in which a dried and smoked herring would be dragged across the trail of a fox to throw the hounds off the scent.
There is an implication in the historical reference that it's a pungent distraction or a pungent move to really take your attention elsewhere, to take your senses in a direction away from where the logic of the conversation was heading.
Another metaphor to use is that it refers to throwing hounds off of a scent, and it's important as human beings to not have hounds chasing a scent be a metaphor for your mental state and your thinking process.
A good point.
Like, we're not hounds, and thoughts are not smells.
And you don't want to have a master that's working your olfactory or any other of your senses to get you headed into the wrong direction. You want to be the master of your own mind, hunt down what you desire to hunt down.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the fox and the dogs would have got along famously without these interlopers.
And was the purpose of throwing the red herring, was it so that the hounds wouldn't take the kill for themselves, or was it more during non-hunt stuff like investigation or something like that?
So they wouldn't take the kill for themselves. They would lead them to it, but then they would get distracted at a certain point, like a line in the sand that smelled like fish.
There's a sense, too, that's implied there that if it's purposefully used by someone rhetorically, it comes when you're getting too close to a logical conclusion that they seek you not to find.
It was a jump to conclusions, Matt. You see, it would be this mat that you would put on the floor and would have different conclusions written on it that you could jump to.
That is the worst idea I've ever heard in my life, Tom.
Yes, it's horrible, this idea.
Another one we hear very commonly used and talked about is the straw man fallacy.
Intentional or unintentional misrepresentation of another person's position or argument in order to make their point or position seem more easily defeatable.
The one I think of immediately is like people who don't really want to talk about 9/11 honestly will say,
I don't want to talk about this because I don't think George Bush, put bombs in the basement of the World Trade Center and then pushed the plunger.
That's sort of like an example of a straw man, because it's no one I know believes that. I don't think there's anyone that really believes that. So that's a practice dummy that someone can use as an easy thing to stab because it's obviously ridiculous.
The thought of him just prowling through the empty tower like a cat burglar.
I mean, if there was someone involved in like Wile E. Coyote behavior, who's proven that they will go to cartoon levels, that would be actually Netanyahu, I think, in the UN. So
we will move on to another fun one. The Chewbacca defense. Chewbacca defense is
when an argument seems designed to confuse the audience rather than to refute opposing claims.
And it's named after an episode of South Park in which an outrageous example was offered.
Mr. Johnny Cochran, your closing arguments.
Ladies and gentlemen of the supposed jury, Chef's attorney would certainly want you to believe that his client wrote Stinky Britches 10 years ago. And they make a good case. Hell, I almost felt pity myself. But ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, I have one final thing I want you to consider. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chewbacca. Chewbacca is a Wookiee from the planet Kashyyyk. But Chewbacca lives on the planet Endor. Now think about that. That does not make sense. Why would a Wookiee, an 8-foot-tall Wookiee, want to live on Endor with a bunch of 2-foot-tall Ewoks? That does not make sense. But more importantly, you have to ask yourself, what does this have to do with this case? Ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with this case. It does not make sense. Look at me. I'm a lawyer defending a major record company, and I'm talking about Chewbacca. Does that make sense? Ladies and gentlemen, I am not making any sense. None of this makes sense. And so you have to remember, when you're in that jury room deliberating and conjugating the Emancipation Proclamation, does it make sense? No. Ladies and gentlemen of this supposed jury, it does not make sense. If Chewbacca lives on Endor, you must acquit. The defense rests.
Okay, then.
Is that a newly added category of logical fallacy, or is that a remix of an older category?
It's actually one of the oldest and most widely used defenses in law. It's sometimes even successful. The name is new, but it's actually been around quite some time. And it also makes sense because a defense attorney's primary job is to cast doubt. And where there's confusion, doubt is not far behind.
There's actually almost what you would consider some type of neuro-linguistic programming or a repetitive psychological effect of parallel programming of this doesn't make sense, so this must not make sense also. And also just keep on saying the same thing that something doesn't make sense. So the idea that it doesn't make sense is what the mind hears.
Another logical fallacy is called affirming the consequent, where, for example, one premise you have is
fascists support a strong military. John Q. Warhawk supports a strong military. Therefore, John Q. Warhawk is a fascist.
Jeremy does this. Woody Harrelson does this. Therefore, Jeremy is Woody Harrelson.
Are you saying Alex Jones is Bill Hicks?
Alex Jones looks like this and cares about these issues. Bill Hicks looks like this and also cares about these issues. Therefore, Alex Jones is Bill Hicks.
Woody Harrelson respects cannabis. Jeremy Rothkushel respects cannabis. Woody Harrelson is Jeremy Rothkushel.
That does not make sense.
And it could go either way. You could sort of push it back and forth, so it's very sculptable.
It's almost like an error of conflation.
A conflation error. It is very much related to the precepts of logical thought in terms of having enough coordinates to prove a line, in a way.
Jeremy Rothkushel is Woody Harrelson. Computing.
If you were like the early father of the AI, you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's making progress, but it still hasn't made it to human rational thought. Elon Musk wouldn't be that scared yet, so.
Elon Musk isn't scared. Nelly isn't scared. Therefore, Elon Musk is Nelly.
That there is affirming the consequent fallacy. What is it called again? Affirming the consequent?
Consequent, yeah. Another fallacy that's somewhat similar is called affirmative conclusion from negative premise, where you begin with a negative premise, such as
homelessness is not good.
And then you add another negative premise.
Dead people are not homeless.
And therefore you end up with an attempt to make an affirmative statement from those premises.
Therefore, being dead is good.
Homelessness is not good. Dead people are not homeless. Therefore, being dead is good.
Two wrongs don't make a right, or somewhere in there.
But not necessarily two wrong actions, which was how we normally think of that as, transgressions against people. But this is two transgressions against logic don't make logic.
So you can make a double negative statement that then ultimately becomes a positive statement, a conclusive statement about a positive logical construct.
It can be done. Be careful on whether the premises do connect, because I could say, vegans don't drink milk. There's no milk in water, therefore vegans drink water. Sometimes all of these fallacies check out, and we'll talk about that later. But these are formulaic manipulations to watch out for.
So they can be true. A statement that uses these logical fallacies could potentially be true, but it would still not mean that the logical process was valid. Is that true? Or can these logical processes actually be valid sometimes?
I wonder. Another household name among fallacies is the false dilemma or false dichotomy. That involves
reducing a range of options into an either-or statement.
So on 9/11, did George Bush push the plunger Or did arachnids from space use photovoltaic mind weaponry to destroy the towers?
Definitely the second one.
6 million ways to destroy the World Trade Center, but you must choose one or two.
You're either with us or you are with the terrorists. America, love it or leave it. Zionist or anti-Semite. This is an especially dangerous fallacy because it marginalizes those who would occupy the middle ground between extremes. It ignores the possibility of any middle ground between two pre-selected choices.
You're either one or the other. There's no room in between. There's no other conceivable category that a person could fall into thought-wise.
It's certainly contributed to the false dichotomy of division in the population. People have settled themselves along these false lines to mirror that same division.
It's definitely a celebrity fallacy. Almost everybody knows it. It would do well to get an Instagram account so people would be thinking about it a little bit more next time they were posed a false dichotomy to choose from.
Vote or die.
That was a good one.
It's interesting that most of them end up making you feel resentful. To me, this is the one that really makes me angry and frustrated, always trying to find the radical middle.
That's the aim of that kind of argument. It nullifies the middle, which on any bell curve, the middle is most of the damn thing. A bell curve is all middle, and that's called normal distribution, is what a bell curve is. So it's defying normalcy to reduce everything to binary options. Because you give enough people enough binary options, then they'll just be binary thinkers and binary actors in a war between false opposites. And when that happens, you have mutual destruction. Neither polarity is well served by this manipulation. It's the gap between that is important. You can take two peaceful individuals and put them right next to each other, and they'll get along fine. But if you put them at either end of a gladiatorial arena with swords in their hands and say, we're not letting you out until you kill the other one, then there will be very different behaviors because the range of options for these people has been so limited. So it's a great way to set people against each other, is to make them the stark, shadowy Jungian opposition that must be vehemently opposed in an ideological grudge match.
What popped in my mind is Caroline Casey from the Visionary Activist show. She always is referencing someone, I can't remember who, but she always talks about how this person says that if you want to get people to quarrel and not get anything done, tell them that they're on two sides of an issue. And that what two really needs is a third position, is that there's a much more dynamic, constructive, balanced geometry there when you add in just even the extra third. And then one other thing I was thinking was the George Bush example you gave of you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. A lot of times there's a false grammar that's been inserted or a misnomer in a way, so that in reality when George Bush says you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, it's made to be that you think he's talking about we or us is either the American people or the civilized world or humanity of good faith. But in reality, what he's really saying is you're with the Bush gang and the 5,000 guys that Rothkopf says rule the planet, the super class. You're either with us or you're with the maybe 5,000 people in the world who've ever done terrorism. Like you said, the mass of the bell curve, the mass of the middle is not even in that equation when it's 10,000 people out of a planet of 7 billion people. Be like, nah, I'm with the 6.99 billion people, and neither of those.
But that kind of choice limiting has led people to say,
man, I guess I'm with the terrorists then, because I'm not with the Bush gang.
Those are two very unappealing choices, and sometimes people are going to make the choice you don't want them to make because they resent the fact that you limited their choices so heavily.
It's a good point. And it points out the life and death importance of good thought and of something like a trivium method, so that you can break it down and you can re-identify, meaning...
Oh no, both of those, he's actually talking about one and the same. No. Oh, wait a minute. What does George Bush do? Okay. Oh, he does terrorism. So he is one of these terrorists that he says he's against.
So, oh no, we can claim the moral and epistemological high ground by re-identifying grammar as such. Terrorist as terrorist.
Terrorist is as terrorist does. Terrorist is as terrorist does.
That kind of leads to another logical fallacy known as the appeal to tradition.
This is how we've always done it. This is why we need to keep doing it that way.
I've been doing this way since 1938. So I'm not going to use that computer, that newfangled machine.
But that's been almost equally effective at neutering our capacity to respond spontaneously to life's challenges, where we're married to things the way we do them, whether they're good or not. It limits our desire to perceive the possibility of improvement or change. It's kind of a intellectual submission to the tyranny of history, in a way.
It sounds sort of similar to what you previously said, that the seat in the Empire of Lies is comfy, but it's a horrible view.
Or the seat's not comfortable anymore. The view still sucks, but this is where I always sit.
This is my seat.
This is my seat.
Yeah, exactly.
This logical fallacy has so much social weight and tension built into it, into its consequences. Humans sort of naturally, I think, come up with new ideas or, think about something new that they never thought of. But when you weigh that against all the weight of your society and your family and human history, it seems like not a fair battle in a way. And there's too much social consequence, it might seem.
What is it about society that disappoints you so much?
Oh, I don't know. Is it that we collectively thought Steve Jobs was a great man, even when we knew he made billions off the backs of children? Or maybe it's that it feels like all our heroes are counterfeit. The world itself's just one big hoax. Spamming each other with our running commentary bullshit masquerading as insight. Our social media faking as intimacy. Or is it that we voted for this? Not with our rigged elections, but with our things, our property, our money. I'm not saying anything new. We all know why we do this. Not because Hunger Games books makes us happy, but because we want to be sedated. Because it's painful not to pretend. Because we're cowards. Fuck society.
Tradition be damned,
If you have grammar, logic, and rhetoric, these are all fair battles. They level the playing field in this regard. There's an equal treatment of ideas under logical examination. There's no special treatment, and there's no special case given to any claim for any reason. Either they hold up with the tools of scrutiny, or they don't. Once you have the tools, anyway. If you don't have the tools, you're very short-handed relative to some of these ideas, like an appeal to tradition, for example.
These kind of tools actually allow for the dispersal of fear. It's almost like the idea of
when you can name something, the fear of the unknown begins to dissipate.
Similar to like the expansion of a map, where it used to be there'd be dragons. No. Mm-hmm. There'd be a logical fallacy that we probably should correct, and we should fill out that map a little more fully. Or there's an appeal to, we've always done that, so we always have to go and throw poop at each other. We can identify the actual structure of what's happening, and once we can name it, then we can change it.
I think of a 35-year-old man wearing a dirty diaper, and someone walks up to him and says,
Hey guy, why are you wearing a dirty diaper?
He says, I've always worn these diapers. As long as I can remember, I've just been wearing diapers. And
if you don't accept other examples of this appeal to tradition, like, we used to not be able to speak, so why ever start? We used to do a lot of things that we shouldn't do anymore. That is one of the arcs of human progress, is that which we have decided to leave in the dustbins of history for a reason. And I think on the other hand of an appeal to tradition, there is an appeal to novelty. And that is the argument that something is good or has merit just because it is new. On one hand, we can maybe let go of some of the fear of the unknown that an appeal to tradition would have us feel, but also a blind embrace of the unknown in all of its permutations is not exactly wisdom either.
Good point. So the radical incisive middle finds its way through both fallacious extremes. It seems also related to what I call like reactionary epistemology, so that if you have a sense that there's a group of people that either don't have your best interests in mind or have your worst interests in their mind, there can be a tendency to react to that by saying that
if they say A, then it must be B. If they like B, then I must not like B.
So that knowledge can become reactionary, and I think you've identified that ideas can become reactionary to the past. If they're just novel, then they're considered right. And that it's somewhere in between those, neither the fallacy of the novel nor the fallacy of the traditional.
These are essentially tools to parse out those manipulations that would herd you into one extreme or another. They're lifelines back to the conscious middle. Speaking of the reactionary aspect of some of these things, here's a good one for you.
My enemy's enemy is my friend.
Many examples of this one. Stalin in World War II was championed by the United States as a man of peace.
Uncle Joe.
The Iran-Contras, the Shah in Iran, the death of Salvador Allende in Chile, because the enemy of Dole is my enemy. Our support of Indonesia and the East Timor genocide, our support of tin pot dictators all across South America and Africa. We've made some very awful friends because of mutual enemies. You're choosing the wrong people for the wrong reasons. That fallacy doesn't account for the flaws and danger posed by the enemy's enemy, which is now your friend, and is potentially greater than that of the first enemy. You don't know beforehand. What you end up doing is continually making friends with people that other people find antagonizing. You end up with a very polarizing sort of friends.
The description of that also brought up in me whether there's a logical fallacy of a false identity in the way that we talk about, where we identify ourselves with our government. We did this, we did that type of thing. It reminds me of, I think it was Mos Def on a Bill Maher show.
First of all, that was a problem that they had before we came. First of all, I'm going to kill all this we shit. We didn't do shit. I didn't endorse this war. We collectively just accepting it. We did. That's like you driving a car and somebody get in real fast on my drive. They be like, we got a situation. I'm like, we what? Nigga, I was waiting on you to come outside. What? We ain't do shit. You went in there and did something.
But also, sometimes that's just a pronoun of convenience when the United States of America, military-industrial complex, private security force is a bit of a mouthful.
I would also maybe even make the case that it's a term of responsibility, that this was done in my name or my family's name, and so I have responsibility for this. So that's an interesting one, that one. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. All of U.S. foreign policy has been built on that logical fallacy, at least in terms of its rhetorical stance. Well, it definitely seems to exacerbate tensions and destruction, which sometimes serves the interests of certain groups of people, but it doesn't serve the national interests. And of course, that again is another false identification fallacy that's used a lot, the national interests, or
we're going to go protect our national interests.
No, they're going to protect Rockefeller rubber or Dole fruit. Yeah, you could say, all right, the nation uses some of these things, but we're not talking about national interests. We're talking about very specific corporate or oligarchical interests.
I would refer to that as either a half-truth or coded language. Because if you really stretch out that phrase, they kind of are national interests. Not you and me, not our interests, but they're interests that tangentially relate to our flag and our borders and our economy. Speaking of America's foreign policy... we have the fallacy known as appeal to nature.
Appeal to nature occurs when an argument is used to minimize the degree to which a negative outcome or pattern can be altered or avoided.
This is often used to justify the negative scenario and excuse apathetic attitudes toward it. The way I see this most often used is in regards to our opinions and belief on the inevitability of warfare.
There's always going to be war.
It's human nature. It's human nature.
We can't do anything about that. That's a waste of time. It's human nature.
It's a very common fallacy. It's kind of imperceptible. Most people don't often think about it as a fallacy because they bought the assumption. They agree with the faulty premise that this is actually human nature. But there's a problem with facts there, is that if it was human nature, then all people would be engaged in a state of warfare constantly. Most people are conducting their lives rather peacefully. It's just the anomalous invasions and military actions that give the rest of us a bad name and a bad view of ourselves. It's bad logic, and it's not true. Most people tell you something is human nature when they don't want you to think about being able to change it. They're taught to be used in an offensive fashion. None of these people want a world in which the average person can use these both offensively or defensively. They want a select class of elite education to be the ones who get to wield the tools.
Empowering ourselves with this knowledge is actually a potential form of intellectual self-defense, to begin to understand when it's being used against us. It seems like it might be a part of the fallacy of appeal to nature, but this is the one that I associate most with operatives that I perceive as of the CIA.
I guess we'll never know. We never knew who actually did the Kennedy assassination, so I guess we'll never know what happened this time.
That does not make sense.
That is actually called an appeal to mystery.
Oh, God.
It is one. You nailed it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for filling that in. See, now I can begin to recognize these a little bit more rather than having them floating in some imperceptible archetype in the back of my brain.
You mentioned this as kind of a method of self-defense. That's my whole incentive for having this conversation like this. Between when I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed at night, I encounter 200 of these damn things in social media, in distribution and replication of memes, in sound bites, in the disconnect between the content of an article and the headline of an article. All these fallacious disconnects in our daily psychosphere that we need an umbrella so they don't just bonk us on the head.
It's raining cats and fallacious meatballs.
Pretty plucky, these fallacies hurtling down from the commanding heights.
We'll get into this later too, but the frustrating thing is that we're the ones reproducing them and spreading them, acting as vectors in their evolution.
Mimetic vectors. This is an important way to think about this. No matter where the original vector was, the source was, the patient zero of the meme, when we become the unwitting vector, then we're the ones who have the power to stop it, and we have to if we want to have some sanity.
I take it as granted that the media and other social forces are going to try and manipulate us through sophistry and other means. But what really bothers me is when I see us helping that process by doing it to each other, by regurgitating these false meatballs. Old Smokey covered in bullshit.
Old Smokey, all covered in smut. I lost my poor logic.
My head up my butt.
There's another one that we see pretty frequently in form of usually list articles, such as top 50 reasons why you should support X or Proposition 9. This involves the debating technique of drowning an opponent in such a torrent of small arguments that the opponent cannot possibly address each one in real time. And more often than not, these myriad arguments are full of half-truths, lies, and straw man arguments. The only condition is that there be many of them, not that they be particularly compelling on their own. And I have an example here. There's a number of them. I'll read an article called 50 Reasons Why You Should Vote
or Die.
Frankie says, relax.
Voting can make you Superman for one day, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. A vote in honor of Captain Nathan Hale, who said for you, "I only regret that I have but one life to give for my country."
Oh my gosh.
65,000 people died or were wounded in the American Revolution, the start of what has been a great experiment in democracy.
Oh my gosh.
So you can complain with integrity.
I hate that one. I like George Carlin's counter to that one. Be like,
I have solved this little political dilemma for myself in a very simple way. On election day, I stay home. I don't vote. Fuck them. Fuck them. I don't vote. Two reasons I don't vote. First of all, it's meaningless. This country was bought and sold and paid for a long time ago. The shit they shuffle around every 4 years doesn't mean a fucking thing. And secondly, I don't vote because I believe if you vote, you have no right to complain. People like to twist that around, I know. They say, well, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain. But where's the logic in that? If you vote and you elect dishonest, incompetent people and they get into office and screw everything up, well, you are responsible for what they have done. You caused the problem. You voted them in. You have no right to complain. I, on the other hand, who did not vote, who in fact did not even leave the house on election day, am in no way responsible for what these people have done and have every right to complain as loud as I want about the mess you created that I had nothing to do with. So I know that a little later on this year you're going to have another one of those really swell presidential elections that you like so much. You'll enjoy yourselves. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm sure as soon as the election is over, your country will improve immediately. As for me, I'll be home on that day doing essentially the same thing as you. The only difference is when I get finished masturbating, I'm going to have a little something to show for it, folks. Thank you very much.
To set a good example for younger generations.
To be dupes? I don't...
That does not make sense.
Oh, man. This is an actual listicle? This is some type of article, huh?
This is. I'll put a link to it in the notes, in the show notes.
Oh, boy.
One of the list items is a quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Vote or I'll kill another Kennedy. Kennedy.
The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men because they are different from other men.
Because he needed a vote to continue the Vietnam War, yeah. And not get caught for being part of killing the president, the previous one.
Colonel Sanders doesn't want people to vote. He wants people to buy chicken.
Buy chicken or die. 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 Nathan Hale. Thomas Paine. Paine. Charlie Parker. Salvador Dali. All of these people knew about chicken.
I've got more of these reasons why you should vote.
Yeah, this is rich. There's a layer of fallacy here, too, because it's like, I don't know if it's an official fallacy that, okay, yes, no one wants to deny that a vote could be something that could be important. But there's all these in-between steps that are missing here.
If people won't vote for good candidates because we think they won't win, why will good candidates continue to run?
Continue to run?
It also implies that there have been good candidates all this time,
but people just have not managed to vote for them yet, out of the two. In a 50-50 chance, people are still not managing to choose the one that would be considered good.
They need enough people to vote for Ralph Nader so they can blame them afterwards for when the Bush steals the election from Gore.
Don't blame me. I voted for Gore. Don't blame me.
Shepard Fairey, the artist, was at USC and he was talking about not voting third party because look at what happened in 2000. And it was his reason for supporting Obama and for using his art to prop up Obama.
That does not make sense.
Reason number 31.
The anticipation of waiting to see who wins.
Oh, the anticipation. Oh.
That shit feeds right into the whole way that the media is used to shape perception.
Wait, you mean to tell me that people use the media to shape our perception?
No!
Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Pure passion for the facts. Passion.
Reason 38.
To vote for the lesser of two evils.
What? Oh
Actually,
my
put that
gosh,
in there.
dude.
I know.
Be evil. Just don't be that evil. Get a chance to do less evil.
I voted. I contributed to a marginal decline.
The road to evilness went from pitch 15 to pitch 12.
Reason 42.
To honor the 2,852,648 U.S. citizens who gave their lives or have been wounded to protect the Constitution that protects your right to self-determine your community, state, and nation.
Oh my gosh. Well, what a horrible fallacy. I can't really even think of a single person who died in the military that had to do with protecting American votes.
They're still not the only way to honor them.
Uh-huh.
That's the false dichotomy, the false dilemma we were talking about earlier, is that either you honor these people and vote, or you don't vote, and you make their entire lives worth nothing with your inaction at the voting booth. A weak claim. Reason 44.
Our military protects us, but who protects them? You are their only defense. You can control through votes and citizen action how our 1,369,532 active duty service members are utilized.
No one's ever voted on a military plan.
Uh-huh.
No one's ever voted on a declaration of war. These things are always done at the executive and legislative level. You vote for people who make these choices, but you actually are not their only defense. You have very little control over how America's foreign policy is conducted.
You're right in that a lot of this stuff is just about smearing, this thing for all these different things, and the logic is very, very feeble. You could think about it as like,
because you didn't vote, kids in Flint, Michigan got lead in their water.
No part of our votes affect any real thing about Flint, Michigan. It's all such indirect association. It's just a number of these easily dismissible claims. It's called a gish gallop. Like a horse ride through a manure field, essentially. It takes more time to unpack these rubbish claims than it does to propose them. Therefore, that's why they're effective in high quantities, even if individually they are very weak.
I see how this works, actually, because if you were to write a counter-narrative to this absurd listicle, it would take forever, and so you're dissuaded from doing it in the first place.
You just sit at home and hope nobody else falls for this shit. Just scratching your head like, oh, God.
Damn, man.
Is everybody else not buying this shit, too?
One can hope. Throw one batch of fecal matter at a person, and it's fairly inconvenient and it's gross. But if you get a cement mixer full of it and dump it on them, it's a very different experience. The quantity of morass.
Morass. It's true, because if you just threw a couple pieces of feces at somebody, yeah, they'd wipe it off real quick, but they'd be focused on who the fuck threw the feces at them. But if you dump like a full load of fecal matter on them, they're like so taken up in trying to clean all the crap off that they're not dealing with the person who did it.
Yeah, by the time they get washed up, it's time to go to bed.
They're washed up, yeah.
Shit, then I gotta go to work. I gotta get the kids. I gotta get the dry cleaning. I don't have time to think about who dumped all that feces on me right now. There's also a fallacy called no true Scotsman. The no true Scotsman fallacy involves
redefining groups to better suit one's argument.
No true Scotsman as a term is attributed to British philosopher Anthony Flew, who discussed it in his 1975 book, Thinking About Thinking. He wrote,
Imagine Hamish MacDonald, a Scotsman, sitting down with his Glasgow Morning Herald and seeing an article about how the Brighton sex maniac strikes again. Hamish is shocked and declares that no Scotsman would do such a thing. So the next day he sits down to read his Glasgow Morning Herald again, and this time finds an article about an Aberdeen man whose brutal actions make the Brighton sex maniac seem almost gentlemanly. This fact shows that Hamish was wrong in his opinion, but is he going to admit this? Not likely. This time he says, no true Scotsman would do such a thing.
We see this often in both sides of the religious extremism conversation, where extremists say religious moderates aren't true believers if they don't share the extremist point of view.
They say, well, that's not a true Muslim, or that's not a true Christian, that's not a true Zoroastrian.
Or, on the other hand, when religious moderates say religious extremists aren't real Christians, Muslims, Jews, Zoroastrians, followers of the Baha'i faith, because they don't adopt the moderate perspective. Other instances of this are calling something un-American. If it's something an American does, and you're calling it un-American, that's because what that person is doing doesn't suit your argument of what that person is. We also see this in the Republican Party, where they have the phrase Republican in name only.
Rhinos and dinos,
You can't change the parameters on the fly to suit an argument or an agenda.
It's sort of related to the idea of moving the goalposts or that type of thing.
It is related to that, but involving the definitions of groups, yes.
I'm most familiar with it in combination with an appeal to authority around institutional left gatekeepers towards the truth of 9/11.
There are no peer-review papers about the World Trade Center being destroyed by some type of weaponry.
And then after it's done,
there are no true peer-reviewed papers that have been written about the World Trade Center being destroyed.
Or
there are no engineers who say this.
Or
there are no structural engineers that have an office down the hall from Noam Chomsky at MIT that believe this, you know.
It involves the definitions of groupings of people in order to include or not include certain people in a claim of authenticity or non-authenticity.
The fallacy of causation. And causation is where
a person confuses correlation with causation. It's when something is not truly the cause of the effect, but is portrayed as such.
An example would be that there's a positive correlation between the sales of ice cream and violent crime. But to claim that one of these phenomena causes the other is to commit the fallacy of causation. Because ice cream sales go up in the summer when it's hot, as do violent crime statistics. Violent crime is not caused by ice cream, or vice versa. And we see another argument in this realm that's been made in regards to violence in video games by the often lambasted social heel named Jack Thompson, who also argued for enforcing obscenity laws against rap music in the early 90s. The whole 2 Live Crew dust-up. He also argued that, in addition to the obscenity laws and hip-hops, he argued that violent video games cause violent youth, whereas true investigation of this subject reveals that youth who are already violent are drawn to violent games because they're violent. Violent people have an interest in violent things. Peaceful people don't get as much out of Call of Duty and blasting digital human life off the face of the earth as people who have that kind of similar tendency. And regarding the obscenities in rap music, youth are using obscenities because the world around them is obscene. He's making a classic error of causation, not a very popular figure.
Jack Thompson is a prostitute. Senior officers found if they trained the soldiers by putting a Jack Thompson on the bullseye during target practice, they could actually condition men to shoot low-level thugs. Here's the point. We are training our kids to be Jack Thompson. I am blaming all of society's problems on Jack Thompson. Jack, tell me what happened in Alabama in 2003.
In Alabama in June 2003, I've killed 3 cops. I've trained, by the way, on Counter-Strike Half-Life and Grand Theft Auto. I've played Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City obsessively 10, 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. We could fill up the next 30 minutes talking about school shootings linked to oral and anal sex with minors. I've bought Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City with no parent in sight at stores. In Red Lake, Minnesota, I've killed 32 minors.
Hi, I'm Jack Thompson, and I'm gonna scat all over you.
Grand Theft Auto is a murder simulator endorsed by Hitler himself. It's like 3 Nagasaki bombs all in one CD. The Sims 2 has nipples and penises and pubic hair in it. Look, it's there.
Boy, I sure do hate Islam. Ha!
I'm Jack Thompson, the scourge of the 7 seas. I'm a turd. No, I didn't really think that one out very well.
This is then the correlation causation switch up.
The conflation of correlation and causation.
Across the nation. Across the nation. Across the nation. Across the nation.
This is a crucial one in terms of like scientific thinking. Folks do this both ways, that they'll sort of use it to debunk science in a fallacious way or to affirm the solidity of scientific knowing of truth. In all of science, there's a gradation in terms of correlation and causation, and that you can almost never be completely sure that you have 100% indication of causation, because you can never know all of the unknown factors. In Rumsfeld's terms, you can't know what you don't know. The unknown unknowns there still exist out there. I think that's an important one to really understand about, even beyond just sort of like a fallacy of the conflation of correlation and causation. That there's actually a spectrum between correlation and causation sometimes in terms of one's epistemological surety. That might be interesting for people to begin to think through, because there's a tendency right now to like,
well, science says, you know.
No, science is a process of learning how to know something through experimentation and making hypotheses. Science is not like
science says.
There's almost always some uncertainty involved.
Science is the method, not the conclusion.
Yeah.
Conclusion is one part of the method that everyone gets hung up on, and they try to memorize as many conclusions instead of using the process in their own life and in their own inquiry. Furthermore, there's the appeal to emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a subset of each individual emotion. There's the appeal to confidence.
Trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm the best. Come on, get out of my way.
There's the appeal to fear. There's an appeal to flattery. There's an appeal to gravity or seriousness. There's an appeal to money or financial interest. There's an appeal to someone's shame.
Have you no sense of decency?
Shame on you. For shame, sir.
Propriety.
And then there's also tone policing, where you're not engaging with what someone said. You say, well, I don't like the way you said it. Even the way you said is all factually correct, yeah.
You're yelling. You seem angry. This week on Twitter, the neocon John Podhoretz said, I seemed anxious.
Another form of tone policing is trying to enforce obscenity laws for profane language.
I get it, you're expressing yourself, but I just don't like the swear words, okay? If you're gonna talk about shit, you need to say poop.
Preferably feces. 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 Feces.
You also have the fallacy of appeal to authority. Like you mentioned earlier, you knew it was going to come up. How could it not? It's one of the best.
Joe Biden said it. It must be true. I saw it in Time magazine.
Neil deGrasse Tyson says it.
These couplings right here of the appeal to emotion and authority are very much wrapped up in the tendency to conflate logic with rhetoric. That a lot of authority and emotion comes into play in rhetoric a lot of times. It's unavoidable to some extent, because that is a piece of rhetoric, is that if you're trying to get someone to understand the logical consequences of something, there might be an emotional undertone that's a logical consequence that needs to also be involved. And then also there are things such as where you begin to have more trust for people that have shown that they have an authority based on following some of these guiding principles of logic. So you have a sense of, I can rest a little bit easier, and that this person, at the very least, is not using weaponized fallacious logic against me. I can at least have a sense that they're operating in good faith. These are not universal in terms of throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
But what this is saying is that an appeal to emotion is by no way proof of a relationship between the premise and the conclusion.
Yeah.
Whether an argument appeals to you using flattery or not has nothing to do with the validity of the claim or supposition. It's just a separate thing altogether. It can be a useful communication tool, but that doesn't mean that it is logic.
That's a good point. And so a lot of this is describing missing steps, or where you've skipped logic and you've gone straight to rhetoric. And that's interesting because that actually plays out a lot. Someone was making the point to me of like,
Noam Chomsky doesn't agree with the premise of what you're saying about 9/11.
no, I can't get Noam Chomsky to actually admit that there's a single fact about 9/11. He skipped over grammar and went straight to logic and then into rhetoric. And so it's interesting that a lot of this has to do with steps and order and a hierarchy of progress. So you go through grammar to logic to rhetoric, and that sometimes if you skip to rhetoric or you skip to logic, that act alone is a logical fallacy.
The temptation to jump straight to rhetoric is not a temptation felt by people who understand grammar and logic. Those people don't have anything to benefit by taking a shortcut to the end because they know that that shortcut is useless. If you go to draw the conclusions without regards for how your premises relate to the facts and relate to the conclusions, the only people who stand to gain from that are people who don't have a substantive argument to rely on in the first place. So people who understand logic won't let you skip logic and go straight to the rhetoric phase. They'll call you on your bullshit.
I think there are people who believe some grammar and logic should be skipped for moral reasons because it won't end up well, or that type of thing. And so that I think in terms of your case that anyone skipping ahead is likely trying to skip an argument on purpose, I think is probably true.
I think that's certainly true. Even on an unconscious level, we don't embrace that which we would be clearly overmatched by. But I was just saying that even unintentionally, it's not people who understand logic that skip logic, unless they're trying to manipulate you, yes. But the easiest way to understanding is by understanding the facts, the premises regarding those facts, how they fit conclusions, and expressing those conclusions. That's the trivium track right there. The easiest way to get past this barrier is to walk through the door in it. But if you don't have access to the door, you're going to have to try and get over that barrier some other way in order to participate.
I find it interesting, too, the realm of where the rhetoric that is a logical fallacy becomes the content, the grammar, the facts for the next turn of the trivium method spiral. It's an interesting one, too, because it shows that it is an ongoing spiral, that the rhetorical communication that was the result of one turn through the spiral, whether fallacious or not, becomes the basis for the next turn for the spiral, potentially. And there's a lot of interesting material there, especially in logical fallacies, because then that's where intellectual self-defense and usage of trivium method as mental judo becomes crucial, that you can actually then begin to see whether someone's using logical fallacies potentially in a purposeful and weaponized manner against you by doing another turn of grammar, logic, rhetoric, grammar, logic, rhetoric, grammar, logic, rhetoric, grammar, logic, rhetoric.